So let's get to it. First, let's understand how do you measure different kinds of lengths. Now, so if we're talking about measuring length, what we do is we have different kinds of instruments. You have rulers, you have measuring tapes, you have vernier calipers, you have micrometer screw gauges. There are many different kinds of equipments that are used to measure length. So, for even if you talk about measuring tape, right, you need to have the right instrument for the right purpose. This kind of ruler, for example, is probably made up of wood, and it's not something very flexible. It's something that can measure objects that are in a straight line that don't bend. Now, iska kya fayda hai? Okay, if you want to, I don't know, measure something that is like this, then this measuring tape can help you get an andazan measurement because it is able to flex itself. And for example, if you wanted to, you have someone and they have, I don't know, like a belly, and you want to measure it, then you would need a different kind of ruler. You would need you would need measuring tape, and that measuring tape would need to be made of flexible plastic material so that it's able to wrap around nicely and snugly. So different kinds of instruments are used to measure different kinds of lengths. उसके अलावा क्या है कि remember that usually if we're talking about everyday lengths within the household, you would measure them probably within centimeters or millimeters. So, okay, let's just do a quick review of how you would measure such a length. What you would do is you would look at the reading over here. You would look at the reading over here, and then you would look at इनके आपस में क्या फासला आता है. Maslan, for example, you have like, I don't know, for the purposes of simplicity, you have a ruler, right? And this is your object over here. Like the length of your object is just perhaps this. और इसके साथ आपने ये ruler जो है ना, इसको आपने लगा दिया इसको नापने के लिए कि इसकी लंबाई कितनी है. So what would you do? You would do, for example, you would look at your ruler markings. So, for example, over here, let us suppose that, on the ruler, you see that over here, this is 3 centimeters. And when you look over here, you see that it's like, I don't know, maybe 7.1 centimeters. So then what's the length of the object? The length of the object would be this reading minus this reading. So that would be 7.1 centimeters minus 3 centimeters, and that will give you 4.1 centimeters. So this is just a quick recap on how you measure lengths using basic rulers. And baad mein, remember that you also need to keep track of things like parallax error, which we will come to in a bit. Now, sometimes you want to get really precise measurements. You want to be able to measure things very finely, and those objects may be very small in size, too small to easily use a ruler. For example, suppose you have like, as is shown over here, you have like a little ball. It's a very small ball, and I ask you, what is the diameter of this ball? Then you can't exactly put a ruler to it because वो ruler फिसल जाएगा, ball ऊपर नीचे जाएगा. It's not easy. So for that you need instruments like micrometer screw gauges and Vernier calipers. So over here is a picture of a micrometer screw gauge. उसमें आप इसका basic mechanism देख सकते हैं कि this over here, this and this, इसके दरमियान में is where you put the object in. This bit is called the ratchet and this bit is called the thimble. तो अब होता क्या है कि आप basically इनको rotate करते हैं, और जब आप इसको rotate करते हैं तो ये जो है ना, this begins to go that way. So you rotate the thimble until the ball is, nicely in between the anvil face and the spindle. A nice firm grip. So the thimble allows you to make large movements. When you move the thimble, the spindle moves nicely and quickly. तो फिर जब आपने बारीकी का final करना होता है कि final tweak so that it's nice and tightly attached to the ball, then you also rotate the ratchet a bit just to get the final grip on the ball. तो एक दफा आपने ये कर लिया. Then what you're going to do is with these kind of instruments, you have two readings you need to take. You need to take a reading of what is called the, usually called like the main scale, right? So you can see over here, it's called the sleeve. ये एक reading होती है जो आप लेते हैं, और फिर ये इससे दूसरी reading होती है जो आप लेते हैं. You can see that over here, that you have this thing over here too. So you have to first take this reading, and then you have to take that reading, and then you have to add them up. And we'll get into how to do that later. अब उसी तरीके से क्या होता है कि आपके पास ये वर्नियर कैलिपर होता है. अब वर्नियर कैलिपर जो है, it is also really helpful to measure different things. For example, suppose you have like a beaker. So then what you would do with this vernier caliper is, suppose you wanted to measure the internal diameter of this beaker. Then ये जो आपको नजर आ रहे हैं, what you would do is you would put one over here and one over here, और इसके ऊपर फिर आपके पास आएगा पूरा जो दूसरा कैलिपर का सेटअप है. Like what would happen is that ये जो jaws है ना, have a look at them. What are they doing? This one moves that way, this one moves that way. So you would get this jaw to move here, this jaw to move here until it's nicely pushing out and it has a good grasp on the inside of the beaker, and then you would measure the reading of the vernier calipers. उसी तरीके से ये वाले jaws हैं, these can be used to measure, for example, like nowadays I'm buying an aquarium. तो aquarium का जो ग्लास होता है वो मैंने नापना है कि वो उसकी थिकनेस कितनी है. तो उसके लिए what I can do is put the glass का जो sheet है right over here and then have the vernier calipers grasp onto it. तो vernier caliper को पढ़ते कैसे हैं? Exact same mechanism. You have a main scale, which is this one, and then you have a tinier scale called the vernier scale, which is this one, and you would add up the two readings and you will get your final reading, and more on that later. So let's just jump into this a little bit more detail, and then when we do past papers, I'll do a lot of practice, so hopefully that will help clarify how to go about this. तो फर्ज करें कि आपने वर्नियर कैलिपर को इस्तेमाल करना है, and you've put a ball inside the external jaws of the caliper, and you want to, for example, measure the diameter of this ball. You want to measure from here to here. तो अब हम इसको कैसे करेंगे? What we need to do is zoom in on what's happening over here. So now have a look. You can see that on this scale, जो इस diagram में उन्होंने कहा हुआ है, is called the imperial scale. It has different names. इसको मैं आमतौर पे main scale कहता हूँ. Anyways, my point is कि आपके पास एक बड़ी scale होती है और आपके पास एक छोटी scale होती है. So now let's see what's happening. So the first thing we do is we see कि okay, ये जो आपकी छोटी scale है, इसकी जो ये lines है, where do they match up with the line of the main scale? So for example, let's see where that would happen over here. It's definitely not here. It's not here. It's possibly this one over here. Right here. That's where you can see that the line beneath and the line above are aligned, right? Like it's like this. Like ये ऊपर वाला है और ये नीचे वाला है और ये आपस में aligned है. So this is really important in order to get what your reading is. Let's see how you would do it, right? So the technique is that the first thing you're going to do is see कि आपका जो है ना ये वाली reading कितनी आती है, this one over here, from this scale over here. So we can see this is 1. We have to go more than 1 because you can see the lineup is happening over here. So this would be like यहाँ तक would be 1.5, then you have 1.6 and you have 1.7. So you have 1.7 and we can see that this is in inches. So you have like 1.7 inches from the main scale. Now, what does the choti scale help us do? The small scale actually helps us figure out कि okay, अब इसका ये जो next हिस्से हैं उसमें हमने कितना डालना है in the decimal dots, right? So let's see what that comes to. What does that come to? Let's see. So you can see that ये दोनों aligned थे ना? So this was at this is 1. So over here this would be 0.9. So what we would end up doing is so like ये जो छोटी scale है that tends to measure within 0.09. Like this is 1.7 inches. The main scale tells you 0.1 tak ki kya uska value hoga. Like, for example, over here, if you had a 3, this would end up being 3.0. And if you had this would end up being 3.5. Or ये जो छोटी scale है, ये जो बारीकी वाली scale है, this tells you, okay, how much more do I need to add to the decimal dot? So how does that work? So just for hypothetical, suppose instead that the इसको इन दोनों को हम कैसे ऐड करेंगे? This reading will end up being 1.79 inches on the whole. Now, for example, suppose that instead of this being 0.09, we were suppose instead of this bit aligning, suppose that this reading actually came out to something like, I don't know, maybe 0.12. Then how would you go about it? Well, then you would do 1.7 plus 0.12, and your reading would end up being 1.82. So it is important to know what the reading on the main scale is and what the reading on the Vernier scale is. I'm calling this thing the main scale, and I'm calling this thing the Vernier scale, and then you would add them up and you will get your final reading. And you will see that the same thing is done with the micrometer screw gauge. Now let's see how you would take a measurement using a micrometer screw gauge. Have a look at this complete device. You can see that it's currently trying to measure the diameter of this stick that is stuck between the anvil and the spindle over here. So the key thing to note is what is going on over here when you're trying to take the reading. So how does it go? It goes like this. The first thing we do is we look at the main scale. We look at this Vernier scale, as it is called. Not the Vernier scale, the sleeve scale. Sleeve scale. Now have a look at this. This is, you can see that we have a 5, then we have a 6, then we have a 7. So, and then we have this. So this is 7.5 millimeters. This is the first reading. Now we need to add to this another tinier reading that comes from this hissa. So what is it? We can see that this is 20 and we can see that this is 25. Now what we need to do is look for the reading on this scale that meets the datum line. That this is the datum line, this thing. So how do we do that? Well, we can see that this reading over here is matching up with this. In other words, 24. So what this means is that we need to add 0.24 millimeters to this reading. So what is our combined reading going to be? It's going to be 7.5 plus 0.24, and that is going to give us 7.74 millimeters. This is how you take a reading using a micrometer screw gauge. All right, so let's look at some other measurement techniques, as I was mentioning earlier. So for example, you want to measure this over here. You have like, I don't know, like a tight wire, tightrope wire, और आपने ऐसे इसको किया और आप इसको अब नापने की कोशिश करते हैं. One really clever thing you could do is take a string, as they've done in this diagram over here, and you can, make that string lie along the exact same path as this tightrope. और एक दफा आपने ये कर लिया तो then you take your string and then you pull that string, you make it straight, and then what you do is you take your ruler and you put that string next to it, और फिर आपको पता चल जाता है कि ये string जो है इसकी लंबाई कितनी थी, और उससे आपको अंदाजा हो जाता है कि फिर ये जो tightrope है उसकी लंबाई कितनी थी. Then as I mentioned, if you want to measure someone's waist, then you would basically wrap something like measuring tape around the round object, and you all know that formula. If you want to, for example, measure the circumference of something, if you know the diameter, and how would you find the if you know the circumference, how would you find the circumference? You would simply put this measuring tape and measure कि क्या आपका value आता है. Then you wanted to find the diameter. What you could do is simply use this formula and put in the value of the circumference you got divided by pi, and you will get the diameter. So, and then you look at this really interesting example. Suppose you don't have vernier calipers, or there's something that's too tiny even for Vernier calipers, then you can take many piles of that and stock them up. तो आप फर्ज करें कि आपने measure करना है कि एक sheet of paper की क्या thickness होती है. So that's very tiny, very hard to measure. So okay, take 500 sheets that has a lot more length and measure what they come to. Suppose it comes to, I don't know, maybe 1 centimeter. Then you would do 1 centimeter divide 500, and that would give you the actual length of one sheet.